we're starting. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 5:04. So before we get started with the formal meeting, I just want to say hello to everyone and thank you for coming tonight. I wanted to provide some information about these evening meetings in the community. For those of you who are not aware, the board amended its bylaws to require to hold evening general business meetings starting on or before or after 5 p.m. once a quarter in each of the counties as funding allows. The intent was to encourage greater transparency and public involvement in board meetings. The board held an evening meeting last October at the Queen Little Kalani building, the main state office. We've held community meetings in the evenings and off-site, but this is the first evening general business meeting we're holding outside of the main state office. I would like to make it clear that I asked the board to simply be provided a space to hold a business meeting and that the school not be burdened with additional expenses like delays for the board members or refreshments. So resources are limited, and these resources are better spent with the students, teachers, and administrators in our public schools and not be spent on unnecessary fanfare. I would like to call on and invite the Kanuki McKinley Roosevelt Complex Area Superintendent Ruth Silverstein come forward and introduce the principals in the complex area. Aloha.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, board chair, and superintendent, and board members. Thank you for coming here today to hold your meeting. And it is with an honor that I begin with the principal of this school, Stevenson Middle School, Linnell Dillon. With Linnell is her vice principal, Sonia Sansona. And it's also an honor to introduce to you the principal of Pullouts Elementary School, Dale Harakaki.
Thank you again for accommodating us tonight. Now, on behalf of the board, I'd like to extend our appreciation to you, Cass Silverstick, and all the principals for attending our meeting tonight. It really is a nice opportunity to connect the names, faces, and schools. So, Kenyon, do we have any public testimony tonight?
Yes, Chair. The first testifier is Julia Tomashiro.
Good evening.
Hi. Hi guys. Okay. So standardized testing limits the capability of high school students to learn and reach their capacity in the state of Hawaii. The emphasis was adopted by the Hawaii Department of Education to be in compliance with the No Child Left Behind Act of 2002. It was hypothesized that standardized testing would benefit students in a variety of subjects. I believe this statement is false and that the accomplishments of an individual are decided by that individual. Testing is not a reliable source evaluating student understanding in any particular subject. Every student has different interests, and depending on the level of their appeal to that subject will dictate what they choose to pursue as a career. As a student of Mililani High School, I strongly disagree with the proposal of standardized testing in the state of Hawaii. There are students who are able to do their assignments and fully understand them, but struggle with taking tests. There are many reasons that explain why standardized testing will not improve the education system. There are many situations where the teacher is unqualified and their teaching skills are either too advanced for their grade level or they lack the ability to cultivate interest in that topic. In opposition to that statement, teachers who use advanced methods to teach their students will prepare them for college. I propose that the DOE should not invest in testing, but invest in making their students feel safe and comfortable in school. We should invest in positive discipline and ensuring that bullying among the students is handled by the administration. In my opinion, people making policies about public education should consider spending time in a classroom before making any decision on how to improve the education system. Discussing ideas with the public will give them a first-hand look on how to deal with the situation. I hope you take my suggestions into consideration, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next testifier is Jenna Pullouts.
Good evening. So you got a fan club.
Thank you. My name is Jenna Pullouts. I'm a junior from Milwaukee High School. I'm speaking in support of the political action that would allow teachers to teach to their syllabus rather than a syllabus that's dictated by standardized testing. So chairperson and board members. Some psychologists describe the relationship between a student and their teacher as simple, like an arithmetic equation. A teacher in a federal job with a federal syllabus and engaging secondary education students equals success. But others highlight a more complex relationship that one might have even with a close friend or guardian. Education must be nurtured to a student, stretched, and formulated to fit the mindset of, for many teachers, over 100 students every day. A cutthroat plan benefits the teacher and forces the students to mold their habit to fit the lesson. In many cases, this is beneficial. The student matures, the teacher progresses faster, and can be more material at a quicker rate. But what happens when the progression of the teacher's lesson plan has a drawn-out, state or federally dictated plan, or even end? What happens when the state teaches the teachers what to teach? Standardization of education and testing is not always a George Orwellian 1984 future. The root of the word itself emits a stigma of setting something to look up to reach towards, to strive to be. But working towards the standard itself is more like an oxymoron. We limit ourselves in the process. I stand here not as one student, but as a student that represents thousands in Hawaii, deliberating if they even have a future in higher education because of the fears of the A.C.T, S.A.T, SBAC, Explore, and various other standard exams, results deeming them unworthy. These tests should be standard, but a growing one, molded around the teacher's plan. The plan for his or her students, not the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier is Matthew Mann.
Good evening.
Hello. So I'm going to go ahead and just talk about my opinion on the Common Core as a student. So when you're teaching a test, it's really undermining the purpose of an education, and that we're going about this authoritarian matter of teaching students what to think instead of how to think. Or even though the Common Core is this inquiry that we need to give higher level critical thinking, well, they haven't really gone about that. See, if we want to create a society of innovators and advocate for advancement as a society, we need to teach students not what to think, but instead of how to approach issues. So from my personal experience, of being within the Common Core for 6 years, and being a rad for 3 years, only twice was I taught why something worked the way it did. Both those times with the same teacher in an AP Calc class. If we want to teach students, we need to teach them the full explanation about why things are. What does it matter if you know that the Magna Carta was signed in 1215? You need to know why it was done. What were the impacts? What were the repercussions? So, Common Core has had a really poor implementation of these critical thinking skills that we need for these standardized tests like SBAC or A.C.T. You want to have these really well-educated, even problem-solving students, but we're not teaching them how to go about those questions. We're just presenting it and saying, figure it out. So the A.C.T is less stressful than other standardized testings, and I like that, unlike the SBAC, this isn't dragged out as long. Also, as my opinion as a student, is if you want students to reach their full capability of what they're handling, you need to have a not as stressful environment. I'm not saying that that test won't be stressful regardless, but maybe we shouldn't hype it up that this is the be-all, end-all of their career and potential to get into school. So, back then to the point of teaching how to think, not what to think, I find it somewhat demeaning as a student that the Common Core treats us as just statistics to be pushed through. That's completely undermining the purpose of going to school in the first place. We're not here to just be another tool to be pushed through like a factory so you can go straight to college and straight into the workforce. We should be taught critical and important problem-solving skills and abilities that we can use in our real life, not just to get into school, but we can use on our own as workers of the world. So A.C.T is a good idea, yet another proposal I have is more so an authentic skill base. What I mean is, instead of seeing who can take a test the best, is can you apply what you learned in class? So an example I thought of is, say you're in physics class and your assignment is to design a device that can, or say building a catapult or something, how can you make it shoot the farthest based off of what you learned in class? Instead of just saying, know these facts, how can we use them to assess ourselves instead of just take these tests? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next testifier is Kelly.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Kelly. I'm from the island of Hawaii. I teach special education 3rd grade. Alright, so I wanted to just tell a little story about something that happened to me last week. I decided to do a lesson in which we would mimic Piet Mondrian, which was a artist who took realistic drawings and he would transform them into abstract using simplistic types of transferring skills. So I took the kids outside and we observed the trees and they drew what they saw and then we came back in, we talked about reducing and doing all those kinds of techniques and I ran into a problem. And the problem was that I didn't have any paint. So I went ahead and I asked the grade level, does anybody have paint? Nobody in the 3rd grade had paint. And it's not, I can go to the store and buy paint, that's not the concern. The concern is, why does nobody in the 3rd grade have paint? I'll tell you why. The concern is that because we only have a 45-minute block, one time a week, to do art. Students who are well below grade level are pulled out to receive additional reading instruction. There's no time for paint. We are required to do 90 minutes of reading and 60 minutes of math. Why? It's on the test. All of our CFA questions are aligned to the language that's used in the test. We are mandated to use a scripted curriculum that aligns to the test. We administer and evaluate tests every week to prepare them for the test. We do 3 weeks of interim testing to prepare them for the test. And then finally, in May, we'll spend another 3 weeks taking the test. So we don't have time to paint. So I've heard the comment that teachers should not be teaching to the test. However, we are. And I believe that schools teach the test for a couple of different reasons. One, assessments are tied to pay, which undeniably causes a state of fear for teachers who are already struggling to make ends meet. Ranking of schools puts added stress on communities that want to be viewed favorably. And last, the race to the top brought with it financial rewards and punishments. This created a competitive environment when we should rather be collaborating and supporting each other. So we now have the opportunity to reshape the strategic plan because of ESSA, and I'm asking you to have the courage to amend Board Policy 2055, which will delete teacher evaluations and student test scores. Thank you.
Thank you. For our next speaker, the testifier comes up, just a housekeeping item for those of you in the audience. The restrooms, men's restrooms are to my right. Women's restrooms are to my left.
Next testifier is Rena White.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Raina Whiting. I'm a kindergarten teacher at Lakewood Elementary School on the Big Island. It's very far away. We got up at 3:30 in the morning to be here today to be in meetings with you folks. So I feel very fortunate to be here and very excited to share what I have to share tonight. My students are kindergartners. They're the youngest students in our public schools. I wanted to share my experience with how testing affects my students. While they are only in kindergarten and outside of formal testing grades, our school shuts down during testing days to solely focus on that test. What does that mean for my kindergarten students? It means that my students receiving services such as intervention, specialist computer class, or those that are in the primary school adjustment program do not receive those services during the testing days and weeks. The teachers and individuals that assist with those programs are being pulled to be proctors for the exams. My students that need the most support do not receive it during that time. When we talk about teachers teaching to the test, of course, teachers teach to the test. It is tied to EES, which determines our pay increases among other things. If teacher students don't perform well on those tests, it could be, and it may be, punitive for that teacher. I've seen this happening at my school, where a teacher whose students have not performed well or good enough on that test, that teacher gets moved to a grade level that they have never taught before, or that is unfavorable in some way. We need to delink teacher evaluations and student scores on tests. I have 18 kindergartners, age 5 and 6, and I'm being mandated as their teacher to read off a scripted curriculum that requires my students to sit for 30 to 40 minutes at 5 years old at a time. I know that this is not developmentally appropriate for them. However, in order for me to pass my EES stigmas and teacher evaluation, I must make my tiny students sit and listen without wiggling for those long periods of time. I'm told by my teacher mentor that my students can sit this long, but should they have to? This is not developmentally appropriate again. However, I can already see why I'm required to have this happen in my classroom for my students. And that is so that they are prepared by the time that they get to the 3rd grade to sit for even longer periods of time to put answers for their testing. My students truly deserve a classroom that is developmentally appropriate, that is safe, inviting, and enjoyable. My students deserve the opportunity to learn how to be a student, interact with their peers, create and learn the skills necessary to be successful. And it truly pains me that my students are pushed in ways that I know is in no way best for them. At the March 1st meeting, I made a call to create a working group. I'm hoping that moving forward we can develop that working group. I propose that that group include teachers and student voices to move forward in our group effort of providing a true, transformational, well-rounded education for Hawaii speaking. It will take all of us, everybody in this room, and everybody sitting in front of me right now, to make that happen. All of us.
Next testifier is Jessica Whitsett.
Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman Peruso and members of the board. My name is Jessica Whitsett. I teach 4th grade at Haile Elementary on the Lakewood Coastal. I would also like to speak about the refresh of the strategic plan, specifically about testing, as we heard before. Just want to echo that at my school we also feel the same narrowing of the curriculum, where we must only focus on reading and math. During my school day for 4th graders, we only have 45 minutes that are not reading or math, and that's 4 days a week. So that's the only time we have for science, social studies, health, and art. That means many teachers are just squeezing in 1 or 2 art lessons per quarter, so we can put a grade on their report. It's not appropriate for elementary school students. We're actively discouraged from teaching lessons that don't have a clear link to a tested subject. The administration will forbid field trips or school assemblies that aren't directly related to the test. last meeting that teachers should know better, and we do know better, but we are being mandated by our administrators to do things that we know are bad, and that we know aren't developmentally appropriate. I also don't think it's my administrator's fault. She's not going out trying to force children to sit still for 4 hours a day and do math. She's also under a very clear objective to raise scores at our school. Our school is really struggling when you look at scores. We feel like we're under threat of punishments like takeover. They're trying desperately to do whatever we can to raise them. I would request that we consider the refresh of the plan. We really look at the goals we want for our schools and our students. Having a narrow definition of success for schools as test scores only, or as the main measure, means that people at every level of the system are making decisions to prioritize testing and test prep. So even well-meaning people who know better are being forced to make bad decisions. So I hope that as we move forward, we can make choices that are better for children.
Thank you.
Next testifier is Debbie Anderson.
Good evening. So a lot of people waiting.
I've got my coaching shirt on. I'm psyched for the track and field season. I'm Coach Anderson. I'm a nationally board certified library media specialist, which officially makes me an NBCT. But after 18 years of coaching the world's greatest athlete from Kaneohe Castle High School, Brian Clay, I have now spent more than a dozen years coaching my peers. So I've taught credit classes on action research, all sorts of different things to meet professional development needs for teachers. Because our goal as a team is to help improve education. That's our bottom line. So I have actually worked for the National Board for 4 summers as an assessor. And for 2 extra summers, I've been the trainer for the assessor. They only take 7 librarians from the entire country for that role. We're looking now under ESSA that there's a chance to take the joint BOE-DOE strategic plan, and rather than just continue it as is, to really significantly think about changes. I saw the March 3rd memo from our superintendent's office, from Mr. Schatz and Ms. Chun, that's talking about some of the transition changes tending to be school ranking types of concepts. We're very much in the support of the 8th grade A.C.T. I'll explain a little bit. I was the co-chair of the senior project for the state of Iowa. I worked with Maggie Cox quite a bit with that initiative. And as part of that, working on the personal transition plan, looking at how to get 8th grade up and qualified and ready. I happened at Oaxaca High to be 7 to 12 as a school. So it was a unique opportunity. We were the first school to really get started with the DTP. And my students and I testified before the board more than 15 or 15 years ago with the e-portfolio with examples by the request of the board. How can we make this successful? So we love the idea of the A.C.T. What if we could take that in the first semester, the results come back, and students could be using that formatively to make decisions about what they're going to register for high school. That would be a powerful change for the good, and that was a wonderful thing seen in that memo. What I don't see in that memo is enough emphasis on the human resources, the EES, the teachers, and how we're going to try to help improve teaching. So I had three pieces I addressed in my written testimony that I just want to briefly cover. The most effective model that we have in America is the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. This has been for more than a quarter of a century and over 200 studies that verify that its effectiveness. And then they're in the 3rd version of making it better, right? We're always trying to make improvements. We do think that when it's time to try to make perhaps a group of working people that perhaps you consider the Hawaii State Teachers Association, HSTA, NBCTs, that there's a group of people who have accomplished successfully showing that what they know about teaching. The other thing about this is it's open so that anyone after 3 years of having a license could choose to participate. So that's a wonderful group. I believe that same thing for teachers. The Supreme Court of the United States uses a document which you can find on teststandards.org. It's called the Standards for Psychological and Educational Testing, APA, etc. And that's when they say what is fair, what is reliable, what is valid. And you can't take a test that's designed for one thing and just use it in another way and say that's going to give you anything of value. So we have a little concern with how that whole tying of 50% of the evaluation of a teacher based on something that they don't really have control over.
So you're going to need to wrap up soon.
Okay, so the two things that I recommend for changes are, one, the DOE has a scale for the Danielson model where they go from 0 and then 2, 3, 4. So there's something missing in that scale in the working portfolio for the NCT and the Danielson observation. Now, if we had heard the questions of the board that you were asking, why is it that so many teachers were rated so high? It's because there's a whole space from 0 to 39 where there's no number. There's no feedback that we can give. It's not even there for principals to be able to try to give. The other major concern that I wanted to mention is, when Danielson decided her model, yes, there's efficient and proficient distinguished, but the concept of the basic is that anyone that is brand new starting out for teaching, or anyone that gets moved into a new position, has to kind of start from scratch. Teacher gets moved from 6th grade down to kindergarten. It takes them 3 years to get rolling to even begin to try to be effective. At my school, we had 14 teachers moving into a new job next year. We are going to operate in basic. So when the Department of Ed decides that they're only going to try to give raises to people who are effective or highly effective, it's not a really good policy for human resources when you're trying to keep people from leaving the classroom after the first 5 years. Okay, so those are some things that we'd like to consider. It's probably, an extension of things as is in the EES is simply not good enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next testifier is Peruso.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to be here and for having this forum. My name is A.C.T. Peruso. I'm a social studies teacher at Lililani High School. I've appeared before the board before, and I also, on this occasion, also submitted written testimony. But I wanted to make this opportunity to speak from the heart, not as a teacher or as a political scientist about policy and process, but about as a parent. I have a 10-year-old daughter, a fifth grader, I've mentioned her before in previous testimony, and I wanted to speak about the opportunity before us now to actually address the situation that she and other elementary school students face. So Olivia's actually grown up, completed her entire elementary education under Race to the Top policies. And so what that's meant for her, under those accountability policies, which I like what we call untested, it's meant that there's been an overemphasis on test scores. And we've heard other folks testify to that and the impact on them as teachers. On my daughter, one clear impact that I noticed, because I am that parent, is that she has not in her entire elementary school education engaged in a single sustained inquiry project. So not one. And she goes to one of the best schools in the state. And what that tells me as a teacher, so I'm putting my teacher hat back on, is not that her teachers or her administrators are at fault, because they're not. I know them, they're amazing professionals, and prior to Race to Top policies, they had been engaged in constructivist and interdisciplinary methods. What that tells me is that there is a system in place, and it's structured by the policies that we have in board policy, that basically encourage teaching to the test and really foster that kind of atmosphere. So I wanted to take this time to talk about what's possible. she has a possibility actually of experiencing authentic interdisciplinary constructivist learning kinds of experiences, and that's possible because of the ESSA. So under ESSA, we can delink teacher evaluation from student scores on standardized tests, and we can develop appropriate teacher-driven standards and assessments. That is within our power, and this is within the board's power to do so. Board policy is foundational, and we need to change policies so that our children have access to the exciting learning experiences that they deserve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next testifier is Lisa Morrison.
Good evening.
Thank you for giving me a chance to speak, and thank you for holding an evening meeting. I know it's been a long day, and we really, really appreciate it because it gives us the opportunity to have more teachers come than we would have been able to come during the school day. So thanks very much. My name is Lisa Morrison. I teach at Maui Waina Intermediate School on Maui. I'm an 8th grade teacher. I did submit written testimony for this evening. That refers specifically to the review and extension presentation that was given at the March 1st meeting, and my concern that it hasn't, the strategic plan publicly at least, the copy that's available, hasn't been updated since 2012, and a lot's happened since then. So I was concerned, as a former math teacher, about the lack of data. Some of them are empty and don't take into account the deleterious effects of EDS on teachers and the smarter balance assessment scores for students. And I think that needs to be taken into account. As you move forward to get stakeholder input, I think it's important to have that already, that information somewhat updated, so that your stakeholders can speak to what really has been going on in the last few years. But tonight, before my time is up, I'd like to focus on one aspect of why we are reviewing the strategic plan, and that is in light of the Every Student Succeeds Act. Because it gives us the opportunity to change how we comply with federal testing requirements. And so I'm going to suggest that we eliminate the smarter balanced assessment in favor of a transition to a standards-based but authentic assessment for students. The smarter balanced assessment is extremely time-consuming. In my last testimony a couple of weeks ago, I referred to the testing schedule that I have, and I brought just our 4th quarter testing schedule, the one that I have to use to decipher when I can have field trips or not. One of our language arts teachers took a timer to make sure she knew exactly how long the test was taking last year. Last year, it took her students 9 hours in total to complete just the language arts section of the Smarter Balanced Assessment. She compared that to the fact that the MCAT, the LCAT, the GRE, none of those take that long. In fact, the only test that she found that came near to how long it takes is the bar exam, and that's only 8 hours. And 9 hours is in just one subject. So multiply that by 2 so that you have math. And then remember, I told you I teach 8th grade. So that's the more tested subject. We've got the HSA science still. We have the NAEP every 2 years. But we don't have to stay here. And as we move to authentic assessment, we have other possibilities. One of those is looking to New York and their performance standards consortium for actual authentic assessment. And we also, in the meantime, have the HSA to fall back on. You know, I used to complain about the HSA. Sometimes you don't know what you got until it's gone. And in the 8th grade, I just wanted to suggest one other thing. I know that you just got done approving the Strive High 2.0 plan, I believe is what it was called, where in the 8th grade is not going to be required to take the Aspire, the 8th grade version of the A.C.T. And I noticed in the DOE report on that there were 2 reasons given. One, that the ACT doesn't provide sufficiently different information from the SBA, which, fine, that makes sense. And that the ACT results aren't available until actually after the students have moved on to 9th grade. But I wanted to let you know that that's actually the opposite. The ACT scores come back, if you take the TASE test in March, the ACT scores come back in May. I've gone over them with my students. It's the SBA that doesn't return results until the students have already moved on. You can't use it for any kind of formative assessment or to help the students. And the ACT has an interest inventory that actually we use to talk to kids about their career choices, which is actually very helpful. So those are the things I'd like you to consider. And last meeting, it was board member Williams suggested that he didn't really want to ask teachers a lot of questions because he didn't want to make us feel like we were under cross-examination. And I appreciate that, but I also wanted to let you know that we get lots of questions, usually from sassy 8th graders. And so I'm totally willing to answer any questions and clarify anything that's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier is Maria Ellsworth. Good evening.
Good evening. Hello again, board, and thank you for your stamina, your dedication to service. Following you all day and seeing what you do, it's quite commendable. I'd really like to address the strategic plan again, the staff success section, specifically the 2B strategies, and again to ask you to reconsider and look at amending the board policy 2055. There's quite a bit of information I gave you in showing how the SLOs specifically and the testing in general, the impact on teacher shortage, which I put in my written testimony. I did ask the HR committee to look at that more carefully, and I hope that all of you have an opportunity to look at some of those websites. I've put bullets to make it easier because some of those documents are quite lengthy, to highlight some of the points of that research put out by the top education experts, and I hope you take the time to do so at some point in time. Not today, because I know it's tired. But I just want to give a couple more points that you may or may not be aware of. You know, back when we had the HSA, one of our biggest complaints as teachers were, kids are not taking this test seriously. It doesn't count for their grades. And now that it's tied to our teacher evaluation, it's really quite disconcerting. You know, we're being evaluated and sometimes pay raises are tied to it. So that's really upsetting. Not all students are motivated as much as we want to hype them up and give them snacks and water on the testing day, ask them to get some good sleep. A second thing I'd like to point out is that some teachers are being evaluated on students they never taught. I hope you guys realize that. I'm in high school, only one grade is tested, and so the whole school is impacted with that one score. And it's happening at the elementary level in different ways too, with the special needs students and such that go from teacher to teacher in their day. So that's really disconcerting. How would you feel if you were an art teacher in high school and you are being held responsible for their language arts skills and their math skills? Okay, third point is the SMARTER test, this balance test, it was never field tested, and parents never gave their informed consent to be part of an experiment. So choosing that test was not a good decision, in my opinion. It says, writing my board meeting contract here, under the teacher evaluation part, that the evaluation design must include multiple valid measures based on transparent teaching standards. Valid is in there, and this test is not valid. The U.S. Department commissioned a survey of all literature and studies done on SLOs and found that they are very difficult to make valid and reliable, and they recommended not to use them as part of a teacher's evaluation and for high-stakes decision-making. You know, we're not against a teacher evaluation system. We want to uplift our profession. It makes all of us who are serious about our profession look good, and we want that. But we want something that is authentic, that really highlights the skills that we have, and we're so proud of that we worked for years, many of us, to develop. So please look at that policy again, and let's look at reevaluate, let's go to work group, let's work together. We can solve this problem and make our whole teaching quality workforce so much better. Thank you.
testifier is Cindy Tong. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Tom from Media, and I've been teaching for 20 years with the DOE. I'd like you to consider a scenario. Let's say I'm your employer, and I'm going to give you a project to complete. You get 10 months to complete the project, but with vacations, it's going to be about 45 weeks. You'll get 190 project hours per employee, and I'm going to give you 150 employees. But we're a big company with lots of projects, so you've got to share. You'll get your workers for 1 hour a day, 4 times a week. By the way, I'm going to take your employees from you sometimes to evaluate how well you're doing on your project, in the parts you don't oversee. I'll give you about a week's notice before I take it. Don't worry, I know you can manage. 2 months go by, I'm going to take all your employees for 2 days to evaluate, but several of them are out sick, but I'll just hand them out when they're ready. 4 months go by, I take all your employees again for 2 days to evaluate them specifically on skills you didn't oversee. 6 months into your project, I'll take your employees again for 4 days for a really big evaluation, and they're so wiped out they can't work for a week afterward. 7 months into your project, about 15% of your employees must go for more evaluations, this time for 5 days, because they don't seem to be following directions well. They have to work overtime to make up their part of the project, but they're not going to pay them extra. You now have only 1 month left, and I'm going to take all your employees one more time for 4 days for another big evaluation. The days and weeks after the evaluation, your employees are exhausted, and almost nothing gets done on the project. By the way, you and your employees, they might want to know what's the results of all these evaluations I'm giving them, but I'm sorry, we're not going to get those evaluations until next year. So you can't problem solve anything. Oh, I forgot to tell you, your pay raise is dependent on how well they do on these evaluations. Consider, this is the reality I've lived through at my school for the last 3 years, and for the 7 years prior at my previous school. I'm a social studies teacher, but I give up 10 to 17 days of instruction every year to give up testing. Our whole school grinds to a complete halt for science, career readiness, rating, math, English language competency, foreign language competency. By the way, in 20 years of teaching, I've never had a single student come to me and go, "Oh, Mrs. Tom, I just can't wait for the test. I love the test. Oh, that was something I thought about for years afterwards." No. But they can talk to me, even now on Facebook, about authentic assessments, their History Day project, the debates we had, the time we went out for community service, the time they came to talk to the board. That's what they talk about. So please remember that required standardized testing doesn't help teaching and learning. It hurts students and teachers. I ask you to amend Board Policy 2055. Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier is Andy Jones. Good evening.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Andy Jones. I'm a language arts teacher at Bradford High School. I'd like to briefly summarize and elaborate on the main points of the written testimony I've submitted. In my testimony on the Educator Effectiveness System, or EES, I begin by questioning the assumption that teacher evaluations are necessary to school systems, referencing the example of top-performing Finland, in which there are no teacher evaluations, and then go on to assert, by way of personal anecdote, that the particular teacher evaluation system we are currently using is having a generally negative effect on Hawaii schools. In regards to the first point, the assumption that newfangled and complicated teacher evaluation systems would somehow lead to better teaching never seems to have been critically examined. This unexamined assumption ties in with many other false assumptions and pretenses of recent educational programs and initiatives. Programs and initiatives that have their ultimate point of origination in corporate motives, and that have been broadly supported by governmental forces, including the much bruited higher rigor of the Common Core state standards, or the related assumption that the standardized tests that, as one critic has put it, have come shrink-wrapped with the Common Core, will serve as an accurate reflection of what students know and are able to do, rather than having a significant negative impact on what is taught and learned in schools. The main point of my personal anecdote has to do with the immense amount of time that the evaluations can take up. It is an unreasonable amount of extra work, and one that cuts into teachers' abilities to make strides forward in the most current 21st century teaching methods and practices. I refer to the OECD report on teacher workload, this sheet of paper that you should have with highlighted strips. The statistics of which tell us that of the 36 countries studied, American teachers work more hours per year than any country except Chile. The numbers for high school are 1,067 classroom hours in the U.S. compared to the OECD average of 644. My wife is a Chinese teacher at Ilani, and I would say that the generous preparation time she enjoys there, about 50% of her workday, is comparable to the OECD average. Needless to say, I suffer from chronic professional jealousy of my spouse. To be sure, I could go on a grand campaign to vie for a teaching position at Ilani, or one of the other fine private schools in Honolulu. But I've decided not to do this because I've come to see it as my destiny to remain within the public school system and do my best to work with others to improve it from within. Finally, I'd like to connect the question of teacher evaluations with an observation. Having spent the first 12 years of my career in Taiwan, where teachers are among the most highly regarded professionals in society, I have concluded that American teachers struggle decade after decade, generation after generation, with what I would call low professional self-esteem. We have been told time and time again that we are the root of the problem with American schools rather than their potential solution. In a lot of ways, Race to the Top has represented the straw that broke the camel's back. Teachers have poked their heads out of their classroom turtle shells and studied research, some of it comparative with educational practice in top-performing countries, that confirms what we know through teacher experience and teacher intuition, namely, that public school education has been heading down a dark path since the turn of the millennium, a dark path associated with four-letter abbreviations such as NCLB, CCSS, and RTTT. And also coming to the understanding that we need to begin viewing ourselves as professionals rather than menial white-collar workers, and demand that we be the primary individuals to call the shots and make the decisions that guide our profession, as is the case in countries in which K-12 teachers are esteemed as highly as doctors and scientists. As a footnote, I'd like to state my conviction that all the teachers here this evening are teachers who would make the cut in Finland. Thank you very much.
Next testifier is Cormac Anderson. Cormac Anderson. Next testifier is Chris Caulfield.
Good evening, I'm Chris Caulfield. I'm Executive Director of Eval Alliance, as well as a Federal Relations Consultant for HSTA. I'd just like to offer some comments for your consideration regarding the Joint Department of Education Board of Education Strategic Plan, including its valuable components on student and professional success. In the 19th century, the poet and abolitionist William Cullen Bryant wrote, "Truth crushed to earth shall rise again." Sadly, for today's teachers and students, truth has been stomped to the ground, buried beneath an avalanche of toxic tests and high-stakes evaluations. If, as the French philosopher Michel Foucault suggested, power is diffuse, constituted through accepted forms of knowledge and animated from everywhere, then our education system advances exactly the opposite. That knowledge is a structured act of domination through which our children must be subjugated to the unblinking sovereignty of common corporate standards. Rather than restore regimes of truth, that, like the performance of childhood, are under constant fluctuation and growth. We reinforce a general educational politics and academic programming that institutionalizes conformity, through which the difference between true and false is turned into a battleground. Possibilities for creative action are marginalized, and speech that critiques systematized standardization is rendered barbaric and unintelligible. Life is not standardized, so we will keep speaking, and here is what we know. An overemphasis on standardized testing has negatively impacted public schools, teachers, and students by narrowing academic curricula, reducing arts and cultural education, causing teachers to teach to the test, decreasing whole child vocational programming, and creating a climate of compliance and fear among students, teachers, and administrators. We know that a 2014 study conducted by the National Education Association, 72% of teachers feel considerable pressure to improve test scores, with the average teacher spending approximately 30% of their time on tasks related to standardized tests. Moreover, a Gallup poll in 2014 of public attitudes toward public schools found that only 31% of parents support using standardized tests to evaluate teachers. We know that in the 2014-2015 school year, approximately 93,000 Hawaii public school students in grades 3 to 8 and grade 11 took standardized tests aligned with the Common Core standards at a cost of approximately $65 per test, yet the estimated cost of standardized testing does not include time spent on test preparation, interim testing, test-driven curricula, classroom materials related to standardized testing, computer equipment, personnel needed to administer tests, consultants contracted to assist with assessment prep and delivery, and the opportunity cost of educational programs that have been eliminated to increase time for tests. We know the American Statistical Association has said that value-added measurement formulas used in our state's educator effectiveness system fail to determine teaching effectiveness with sufficient reliability and validity. And the studies by leading educators have shown that value-added measures are not able to detect differences in content or quality of classroom instruction. No wonder then that surveys of principals conducted by the Education Institute of Hawaii show that 86% of principals agree there is too much emphasis on test scores and that EES has adversely affected the morale of their schools. Therefore, I am asking you to take the opportunity afforded by the flexibility of the Every Student Succeeds Act to abolish the use of teacher evaluations to impact teacher pay and employment status, discontinue the use of standardized tests in assessing schools and their devoted, dedicated, hardworking teachers, implement and develop authentic assessments that de-emphasize standardized testing and instead focus on student performance indicators that promote critical thinking, open-ended question, collaborative learning, and give teachers back control of their classrooms so that the near holy relationship between teachers and their pupils can be fully respected. We have a responsibility to make our schools the sign and signal of our own best selves. And if we can accept it, we can chart a new course for our learning system and allow our kids to create a brilliant future. William Cullen Bryant was right. Truth crushed to earth will rise again. All we have to do is give teachers back their voice and get out of their way. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Next testifier is Corey Rosenblatt.
Good evening, everyone. Appreciate on behalf of the opportunity to have this conversation.
Your mic has to be turned on.
Okay, so no one got good, thank you. Okay. Chairman Moore, members of the committee. I'm Corey Rosenblatt, President of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. And before I begin, I want to say thank you. The last couple of weeks, I've had an opportunity to work with Assistant Superintendent Barbara Creek. I did listen to her testimony this morning, and we've been really trying to understand a lot of the problems when it comes to retaining teachers in Hawaii. And this is one of our big problems. At the beginning of this year, we had over 800 positions that were either unfilled or filled by emergency hires in Hawaii. Additionally, we had over 100 teachers who were teaching outside their area of expertise. In 2010-2011 school year, voluntary teacher separations was at 829. 2011 to 2012 it was 934. Last year, that number had increased to 1,061. The amount of teachers that we have leaving each year is actually increasing. Good news is that emergency hires has gone down. But reality is we still have too many classrooms that have vacancies or are being taught by forensic hires. We also have many classes that are being taught by substitutes. This is a problem we shouldn't gloss over. In fact, we need to be very public about it so that we can solve this problem. At the Human Resources Committee meeting this morning, the department was tasked to find a way to measure the quality and quantity of teachers coming into our schools. So we need to begin data collection in a different way. You know, one of the things that is very important to figure out is when we have an opening, how many teachers are actually applying? Unfortunately, at the beginning of school years, oftentimes we have vacancies and there's no one applying. When I was at Campbell, every year we start off, we might have 3 vacancies in math, 3 vacancies in English. And this impacts our students. How long do they go without having a quality teacher in the classroom? Another problem we have is how much are long-term subs leave. And right now the current statistic is, in order to be considered long-term sub, you have to basically teach for a semester. And that means a lot of our kids are having substitutes that may not be qualified for those positions. And I'm going to give you a personal example. Since January, my daughter has not had a science teacher. She has a substitute. And I'm sure that substitute tries hard. But the reality is you cannot compare a qualified science teacher with a substitute. And I'm curious to know how often is that occurring in the morning, where we have for a couple of months these things going on. We know that's going to have an impact, because I wonder what's going to happen to her next year if she doesn't have this background in science. Another thing we need to look at is, you know, where is this problem occurring? One of the things that we had listening to when we went to talk to our teachers, so many substitutes are being put into classrooms sometimes that when teachers are trying to call subs, there's no one available. This even means that sometimes teachers are breaking the contract by covering for each other, where they've said they can't even take professional development because there are no substitutes available. So one of the things we need to look at is the amount of substitutes in the area as well. The bad part is a lot of times the public isn't even aware of this problem. The idea is as long as there's some adult in the front of the classroom, we feel that that's quality education occurring. But the reality is sometimes people want to be weekend at Bernie's. You know, someone's frozen at the front. As long as that's there, it's considered quality teaching, and it's not. We need to have quality teachers in each side of our classrooms. You know, I always consider what happened if we said this, that unless you were like a doctor or a lawyer, you could not be in an operating room unless you had a license. What if we said the same thing for teaching? We had no exceptions. That you had to have a license in order to teach. The reality is only then would we be aware of the thousands of kids that are being denied that quality teacher. Now, Finland always uses a great model. In Finland, in order to get into their education program, 9 out of 10 students don't go into that. Why, unfortunately, the way the current situation is sometimes we have openings that are not filled, or sometimes we only have maybe 1 applicant. And that is something that we all need to move on to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next testifier is Mitzi Higa.
Good evening.